The elders gathered, their faces grave as they discussed the implications of Yor's reappearance. In Nyamedua, it was B. That some deaths were not natural, that some souls could not rest, and that those who died under mysterious circumstances might return, caught between the world of the living and the dead. Some villagers claimed to have seen Yor as well. They spoke of encountering him on the paths late at night, or seeing him standing by the river, always just out of reach. And each time someone tried to approach him, he would vanish into thin air, leaving behind nothing but the cold emptiness of the night. As the weeks passed, the sightings became more frequent, and the fear in the village grew. Some believed that Yor's spirit had returned to haunt his family, while others speculated that he had made a pact with dark forces in Accra and was now paying the price. But no one knew for sure. One evening, Kofi, now a young man, was returning from the nearby market when he saw his father standing beneath the old baobab tree on the edge of the village. Kofi froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't seen Yor since he was a child, but there was no mistaking the figure standing before him. "Father!" Kofi called out, his voice trembling. Yor turned to face him, the same strange smile on his face. "Kofi," he said softly, "it's good to see you." Kofi stepped forward, his mind racing with disbelief. But just as he reached out to touch his father, his form began to flicker, like a mirage in the heat of the day. In an instant, he vanished, disappearing into the air as though he had never been there. Kofi stood frozen in shock, his hand outstretched, staring at the spot where Yor had just been. His father had vanished into thin air. Kofi's legs trembled as he hurried back to the village, his mind swirling with fear and disbelief. When he reached home, he found Akua sitting outside, her eyes red from sleepless nights. He rushed to her, gasping for breath. "Mother, I saw him. I saw father." Kofi blurted out, his voice filled with panic. Akua's heart sank, a cold shiver running down her spine. She had been living with the fear of Yor's return for weeks now, and hearing Kofi's words only confirmed what she had dreaded all along. He was standing under the old baobab tree. "But when I got close, he disappeared," Kofi continued, his voice trembling. Akua took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "It's not him, Kofi. I don't know what it is, but that man, that thing is not your father. Your father is gone." Kofi stared at her, confused and afraid. But he looked just like him. He sounded like him. How can that not be him? Akua didn't have an answer. She had seen Yor with her own eyes, spoken to him, felt his presence in their home. But she knew, deep down, that whatever had returned to Nyamedua was not the man she had married. It was something else, something darker. The village was in a state of unrest. Yor's appearances had shaken the people to their core. Superstitions ran deep in Nyamedua, and the elders were growing increasingly concerned. They gathered one night in the chief's compound, speaking in hushed tones about the strange events. "Yor Dako's death was unnatural," said Ofori, one of the oldest men in the village. His voice was low, but the fear in his eyes was clear. "His spirit is restless. There is something keeping him from crossing over." The others nodded in agreement. In their culture, it was believed that when someone died under mysterious or violent circumstances, their soul could become trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. And when that happened, they could return, not as the person they once were, but as something else, something dangerous. "He must have been involved in something in the city," another elder added. "Perhaps he angered the wrong spirits, or made a deal with forces beyond his control." The chief, a stern man with a deep sense of responsibility for his people, listened carefully. "If what you say is true, then we must act before it's too late. A spirit that cannot find peace is a danger to all of us." Akua was called to the meeting, along with Kofi and Ajoa, who had also seen Yor in recent days. The elders asked them to describe in detail what they had witnessed, how you looked, how he spoke, and how he vanished. As they recounted their experiences, the elders exchanged worried glances. "There is something we must tell you," Ofori said gravely. "Years ago, before you left for the city, there was a ritual that was performed in this village. A ritual meant to protect the living from spirits that had not found peace. It was a powerful ceremony, and it kept the balance between the worlds of the living and the dead. But that ritual has not been performed in many years." Akua's heart sank. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your spirit may be trapped because we have failed to maintain the balance. We must perform the ritual again, or his spirit will continue to haunt you and the village." Akua listened, her fear growing. The ritual they spoke of was an ancient one, rarely performed, and known to be dangerous. It required the presence of a spiritual guide, someone who could walk between the worlds and communicate with the spirits. But the village's last spiritual guide had died years ago, and no one had been trained to take his place. "The ritual must be done soon," Ofori continued. "But without a guide, it will be difficult. We will need the help of the ancestors." The chief nodded. "We must prepare. The ancestors will guide us." In the days that followed, the village prepared for the ritual. Offerings were made to the ancestors, and the elders gathered in the sacred grove where the ritual would take place. Akua, Kofi, and Ajoa were told to remain at home, as their presence was not required during the initial stages of the ceremony. But on the night of the ritual, something unexpected happened. As the elders began their prayers and chants, a powerful wind swept through the village. The trees swayed violently, and the air grew thick with an unnatural energy. The villagers who had gathered near the grove watched in awe and fear as the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the sound of distant voices, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Suddenly, the wind stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the village. The elders, deep in their prayers, did not notice the figure that had appeared at the edge of the grove. But the villagers did. It was Yo. He stood there, just beyond the light of the fire, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. His expression was unreadable, and his body seemed to flicker, as if he were caught between two worlds. The villagers gasped in fear, backing away as Yo began to walk toward the fire. The chief saw him then, and his heart leapt into his throat. "Stop," he shouted, his voice echoing through the night. But Yo did not stop. He continued to walk, his footsteps silent, his gaze fixed on the fire. The elders scrambled to finish the ritual, chanting faster, their voices trembling. But it was too late. As Yo stepped into the circle of light, the fire blazed up suddenly, casting long, twisted shadows across the trees. Yo looked down at the fire, his expression calm. Then he looked up at the chief, his eyes empty, devoid of any emotion. "Why are you trying to send me away?" Yo asked, his voice soft but clear. The chief swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. "You do not bellow. Yo. You are dead. You must find peace." Yo tilted his head slightly, as if considering the chief's words. Then he smiled that strange, empty smile that had haunted Akua for weeks. "I am at peace," he said. "But you do not understand what lies beyond." Before the chief could respond, Yo's form flickered once more, and then he was gone, vanished into the night like smoke on the wind. The ritual was never completed that night, and the village was left in a state of fear and confusion. The elders debated what to do next, but none of them had any answers. Yo's presence lingered like a shadow over Nayamejua, and the villagers lived in constant fear of his return. Akua, Kofi, and Ajoa continued to see Yo in the days that followed, always appearing at strange times, always disappearing just as quickly. He would watch them from a distance, never speaking, never approaching, but always there, like a ghost trapped between worlds. As the weeks turned into months, the fear in the village deepened. People began to leave Nyamedua, unable to bear the weight of the unknown any longer. The village that had once been a place of life and community was now a place of fear and isolation. Anyor, the man who had once dreamed of a future filled with promise and success, became a legend of death and mystery, his name forever tied to the dark forces that had claimed him. Nyamedua would never be the same.